Hello again. So in this video is kind of going to go along with the reading that I had put up on Moodle that I titled Civil Rights Historical Info. Just those couple of pages of some historical stuff. I kind of want to, explain like why I had us look at that and what I want us to get out from it, to get out of it, to get out of looking at it. And I also want to like frame this in the context of the next few poems that we're going to be reading, like It's Nation Time and Mississippi Goddamn. So I think, like I said in my other kind of video about the history of this time period, we usually learn about the civil rights movement through the context of Martin Luther King, right, and his kind of focus on peaceful protest, and the kind of Christian church connected ideas of like love your enemy and these sorts of things, right? And I do have an essay, a letter, I guess, by Martin Luther King that I have you reading for homework. But there's also that's the one we're more familiar with. There's also another strain within the civil rights movement that is probably just as influential, honestly. We don't really talk about it a lot. It doesn't come up as much in high school history classes of this time period, but it's important and influential, and it's going to connect some of our poems, which is ultimately why I wanted to look at this historical stuff, is to help us better understand the poems that we're reading. So this other kind of strain of thought, I guess, this other kind of political ideology going through the civil rights movement, I would call black nationalism, or not just I would call, but that's what scholars call it, right? Black nationalism. So I'm going to do a whole video about black nationalism for next week, where I'll kind of break it down and explain what some of the main points of it were and all that. But one of the fundamental things about black nationalism is that they viewed America, I guess you could say, as being structurally racist, right? They had a view of the entire government system of America as being flawed and broken and kind of forged in the fires of slavery, and not really redeemable, They didn't believe, as it seems like Martin Luther King at least kind of did, they didn't believe that a few laws would fundamentally change things for Black people in America. They didn't, and after 1965, because maybe like Amiri Baraka, the guy who writes It's Nation Time, and Nina Simone, I think from their point of view, things like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were not sufficient, right? They were not satisfied with the achievements of MLK and of like the kind of short civil rights movement, the things that they got from up to like 1965 or whatever. So yeah, the things that I want to look at here, this is just kind of, I think, just to explain, I'm not trying to convince you of their position or whatever, but I'm just trying to give us some context for like where these people were coming from, right? Why these people would come to a place where they think that America is kind of incurably racist, or like that in order to achieve anything like equality, you would kind of have to, burn the system down and start over. And it's very different where MLK is more interested in like negotiating with power, right? And getting concessions from the government, getting new laws passed and things. MLK thinks that is a worthwhile path. Whereas these thinkers, and we'll read an essay from Malcolm X as well. I'd group him more in with the black nationalists. It was more, we need an entirely new system, that like these little tweaks and changes are not really going to do anything. Okay, so let's get into some of this. And like I said, this is some of the history that I think leads people to a place where they have this view of the American government. Okay, so from the first thing here, this is from the Constitution, right? I'll read just the first sentence because it's a little confusing with the old-timey language, and I'll try to explain it. So it says here, Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons. So, the context of this, right? Number one, that it's in the Constitution, and this was about when they're talking about representatives shall be apportioned. What they're talking about there is like the House of Representatives, right? Which is based on the population. We know, right, that senators, there's 2 senators from each state, but each state has a different number of representatives to the House based on the population. So what they're talking about here is how they're going to determine what the population of an area is for purposes of representation and also taxes. So the language that they use here, they say that the way they're going to figure out the population, adding the number, the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years. So that's the indentured servants that they're including there, right? You might remember from the other video where I was talking about kind of in the 1600s how the category of indentured servant was created as a way to make a distinction between the poorest white people and the black slaves, right? So they're including indentured servants, right? This was another way that they increased the distinction to try to keep the different races in the lowest level of society from banding together. So they include indentured servants in this. It says excluding Indians, Native Americans, right? Not taxed. So Native Americans don't count. 3/5 of all other persons. All other persons would be slaves, right? So what we have here in the Constitution, right, which is supposed to be the founding document that so many Americans will still appeal to, is, the Constitution. We have to respect it. It's very important. We have to follow it, right? In this document, it says that Native Americans do not count as people, right? Do not count as citizens or people, and also that slaves counted as 3/5 of a person, right? So that's just kind of, hard to get over, hard to get past when you see that the founding documents of a country, that, the documents that still have power today, that we still use today, that they say things like this, like that, basically only white people really count as people, and obviously, we could say the same thing about how they would view women or anything like that. But specifically for, these people who were writing the poems that we're looking at in the 60s and 70s, I think these are the kinds of things that would make them say, that America is kind of like, that equality is not really possible with the current government still in power. Okay, so that's the thing from the Constitution. And of course, this is all from the Civil Rights Historical Info, that document they gave to you. So the next thing that they give here, from the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. So you might remember the Dred Scott case. It was, I believe, like a former slave, I want to say, who was then either became free or ran away. I should look this up. I'm a little fuzzy on the details. But it was a former slave who was now free, in any case. And they were in a free territory, right? Because this was a time when America had slave territories and free territories, right? And there's all kinds of arguments over, whether new land would be slave or free. So Dred Scott basically was trying to say that he was in a free territory where slavery didn't exist, so he could not be brought back to slavery because he was, in a free territory. And what they end up saying here, and I'll read through a couple of these, but what they end up saying is that, well, really the first part of it says it the best, so I'll just read it. This is right at the top. It has the number 4 next to it. For the Dred Scott part, it says, a free Negro of the African race whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves is not a citizen within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. So, like, there you go, right? It says, anyone whose ancestors were slaves is not a citizen, in quotes. So yeah, this is another case of, right, denying the personhood, or like any kind of, like, forget about equality, but just that, like, you're also a human, it's like on that kind of level. So this was a decision from the Supreme Court, right, which essentially is the the highest decision maker in America. You can even overturn things that the president does. And they say, yeah, if you're the descendant of slaves, then you're not a citizen. And then they go on to say, if you're not a citizen, you can't bring a lawsuit. So they say Dred Scott, they throw the case out because they say you're not a citizen, so you can't even bring a lawsuit, right? So this is the kind of like fundamental stuff where it's like, can this be fixed without completely starting over, Okay, and then I'll just go to the last group of examples here. These Jim Crow laws, right, which came into existence, like it says, from the 1880s to 1960s. So this is after slavery is abolished. These kinds of laws that they bring in to basically maintain a kind of slavery caste system as close as they can, with it still being legal. So what I find striking about these is just that there's so many of them, and that like the level to which they tried to like make any black person like constantly aware of like the inequality, like wherever you go, it kind of like rears its head that like according to the government, you're not equal, you're not really even a human, One of the things that they said in the Dred Scott, I didn't read the part, but it talks about how the Constitution only deals with slaves as property, right? So it wouldn't make sense to give it rights to something that's property. And again, these are from the Supreme Court, from the Constitution, these types of founding documents for the country. So just to read a couple of these Jim Crow examples. Obviously, there's like 5 about intermarriage. But like burial even, right? It says the officer in charge shall not bury or allow to be buried any colored persons upon grounds set apart or used for the burial of white persons. So it's like, yeah, even in death, segregation has to be maintained. There's some crazy ones like wine and beer. It says all persons licensed to conduct the business of selling beer or wines shall serve either white people exclusively or colored people exclusively, and shall not sell to the 2 races within the same room at any time. So like you can't like you need to have segregation in any kind of bar or anything like that. So it's just like that's what gets me with these, is just like the granular detail where they wanted segregation to kind of intrude upon people's lives constantly. Whatever daily thing you're going to just live your life, it needs to constantly be reinforced, like white people good, black people bad, right? And they used the power of the state governments to do this. Like there's one about circus tickets. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says how you need to have different ticket booths for different for white people and black people at a circus. Like it's just so specific, and that they need to be 25 feet apart from each other. So for so many of these, you have to get out your racist measuring stick and make sure things are a certain space apart. Like it said for baseball fields, they need to be at least 2 blocks apart. Baseball fields for people of different races. Just absurd, right? So I think, and MLK talks about this in his letter, but just think about like the kind of psychological like onslaught this would be, of just the constant reminder, like you're not like the rest of us, you're not equal, you don't get to do these things, we don't view you as a person, So this is where black nationalists are coming from. I think I just wanted to kind of give this context of why these people would look at the American government, even as it's passing the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, and say, like, this isn't good enough. This is not going to get us to equality. We don't trust you, right? Fundamentally, we don't, like, saying to the American government, like, we don't trust you to actually try to do these things, and we view you as ultimately illegitimate. I think that's a big difference when we look at the black nationalists versus MLK, is that MLK fundamentally believed that, like, the American government was legitimate and that you had to negotiate with the government and get concessions from the government. Whereas I think the more black nationalist way of thinking about it would be that, like, the government, is fundamentally racist and not interested in equality and not capable of making things equal. So we need to take things into our own hands and find our own way to try to go about equality. And if we're interested in the government at all, it would be to the extent that it needs to be, again, like burned down and totally created new. So I'll talk about black nationalism more, but I just wanted to give us some of the specific historical things that they're looking at when they view America this way, right? I'm not trying to say that this is the way America, needs to be viewed or has to be viewed. You can view it however you want, of course. But I'm just trying to give the context for the poems that we're going to read and what these people, like the conception of America that I think they kind of had. All right, that's it for now. Talk to you soon.